This is the Frosted Evolution 10 Paper Challenge. Frosted is someone who goes by that name on YouTube, who wrote a comment and asked me how many papers, scientific papers showing evidence for evolution, would it take for you to believe it? And I didn't want to saddle myself with like 1,000 papers, so I said, Frosted, give me 10 scientific papers showing good evidence for evolution, and that might be enough to get me to believe it. So Frosted took me up on that, and he sent me 10 papers on evolution. Now, do they really show evidence for evolution? Well, here's paper number 1. Let's talk about it. The Evolutionary Biology of Chelicerata, which is a grouping of animals that includes spiders, scorpions, ticks, mites, and more. Now, what I noticed about this paper is that rather than giving evidence for evolution, it actually talks about a lot of problems related to grouping these organisms together in a phylogenetic tree, meaning the grouping of animals that all came from a common ancestor. So trying to get these organisms grouped together has been very challenging, and that's what this paper talks about. So it discusses the problem with more organizing by morphological features versus now in recent years we have genetic data we can organize based on genetics. So we have the molecular data to compare, and those don't always match up. So this discusses the overturnings of the previous groupings that were maybe based more on morphology. And it discusses a lot of the problems that still remain with trying to group these organisms together. And so, like, it talks about how, one group of these animals might be united or like considered very close to each other based on a single trait, but that might be the only trait that they really have in common, and then they have a whole bunch of other traits that they don't share in common. And so the way that the paper describes the trying to group these animals in a nice neat tree of ancestry is, it says it's stubbornly unresolved. And it also uses unstable quite frequently throughout the paper. So this is showing more about the problems with trying to group animals together according to the idea of common ancestry. Now, another thing that it brings up a lot is convergence, convergent evolution. Now, for those who are not familiar, convergent evolution is a word used to patch up a major problem with the theory of evolution. And that is that we often see traits that are very similar, either genetically or morphologically, with organisms that are not supposed to be related or very distantly related. So basically, when we try to group animals together based on their similarities, sometimes those creatures will have something that isn't related on that branch, but is very similar to organisms on other branches of the evolutionary tree. So I want to give some examples from this paper because this is so cool. In just this group of animals, the chelicerates, there are it says in 4 separate lineages, venom has evolved 4 separate times. So just within this group, they say venom had to evolve completely separately. And that seems quite unlikely. I think that's a problem for evolution. Also, within this group of chelicerates, they say that silk has evolved completely independently 3 times. Now, overall, if we consider all organisms, evolutionists say that silk had to evolve independently 20 times. Now, that is a major problem for this theory because it's already incredibly unlikely that an organism would evolve silk even one time. you're talking about a complex mechanistic system within an organism. And actually, this paper talks about how spiders have the capability, many spiders can actually make 7 different types of silk and use them for different purposes. So this is incredible machinery within the body of the organism. And some people may object to my use of machinery, but really this is very similar. That is what we're talking about. We're talking about a system within the spider that can actually produce silk of a certain type of substance for whatever purpose it needs. Now, that is amazing. And for that to have evolved separately 20 different times throughout life, but in this one group of organisms, it just so happened to evolve independently 3 times. Another thing discussed in this paper, which may not be seen as a problem in the paper, but I see it as a problem, is that there's a lot of discussion of gene loss. If evolution happened, if life diversified by natural processes of mutation and natural selection, then at some point you have to get genes to originate. And what are we talking about there? We're talking about thousands of coordinated mutations, thousands of mutations that just so happen to line up perfectly to make a code for the proteins and things that are needed to build the systems within organisms. Now, that is not something that we have observed happening, but that's what you need to happen millions and maybe more than millions of times to get the diversity of life that we see on Earth today. So that's a problem. And this paper hasn't helped. So this paper does not qualify as evidence for evolution. Actually, I'm putting this in the evidence against evolution pile. So Frosted, your evidence for evolution, paper number 1, is a bust. It is not evidence for evolution. It's going in my pile of evidence against evolution. Join me next time to see Frosted's paper number 2 that he has submitted as evidence for evolution. Let no other trust in truth.